It's that time of week again when Stephanie Dobson joins us. Stephanie is a lawyer, mediator, and online educator with Hankin Divorce Law and Mediation, offices in Edmonton and Lloydminster. It's time for another episode of Healthy, Thriving Family After Divorce. Stephanie, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Stacy.
We're continuing our theme for the month of June, which is talking about spousal support. Not the easiest subject, but very much an important one. So last week we started kind of getting into the basics, and today we're going to dig a little deeper. So let's talk about when spousal support is actually in place, how does that change over time?
So once spousal support is documented by the spouses, whether that's by court order or by agreement, but just in a document in general, it continues until some new condition arises. So today we're going to cover the 4 ways that spousal support can change. So the first way is when a specific hurdle is crossed. So you and your spouse may have agreed or been court ordered to pay support or receive support for a certain number of months or years, or until a certain event occurs, like remarriage or job training. So if there's that stated endpoint, then often there's a couple of options for how that endpoint will look. It can either be reviewed, meaning it's looked at again based on the circumstances at that time, or it may end forever. So it doesn't necessarily mean that when it's up for renewal or for looking at it again, that it definitely ends. So another way that support could change is if you get a new court order, of course, that changes the term of support or terminates it altogether. A spousal support can also be changed by agreement. So this is where you and your former spouse would agree to end or to change support. And then lastly, death can also affect spousal support. So in the event of the death of the recipient of spousal support will end. But if the payor of support dies, then it gets a little bit more complicated as to whether the deceased's estate has to continue paying spousal support, or if there's other sources of money, like, for example, life insurance proceeds. But it does get a little bit more complicated in that once the death realm comes up.
So how does the person know if they are eligible for a change or even an end in spousal support?
So I want to distinguish here 2 types of changes to spousal support. So to be eligible to change or end spousal support, you need to fit into one of these following 2 types of situations. You either need to be eligible for a review of spousal support or for a variation of spousal support. So if spousal support is to be reviewed, the coined term reviewed, it generally means that something about the award of spousal support will be looked at afresh in the future. So it may be the entire question of spousal support, or it may be entitlement to spousal support, or how much for how long, or it can be the whole kit and caboodle that gets looked at again. But the point is, it's looked at afresh based on a future set of circumstances. So there's also the opportunity for what's called a variation of spousal support. So variation is the key word there. So that means that someone who's applying for the change of spousal support has to prove that there's been what's called a material change of circumstances for either spouse in order to justify their request. So of course, it's very complicated, but the point is that there's some hurdles to cross to be able to change support at a future date.
And what is a material change of circumstances?
So that's another legal term, just like the word entitlement in last week's episode. So really important to look into these words. That's a really great question, Stacy. So material change of circumstances is required to be eligible to vary spousal support. So the Supreme Court of Canada has set out the standard for the meaning of that term. So I'm going to read exactly what the Supreme Court of Canada has said. It means that the change is substantial, continuing, and if those circumstances were known at the time, it would have resulted in a different order. So for example, here's some examples. So change of income for one or both of the spouses, losing a job and being unable to continue payment, retirement, the recipient spouse income now exceeds the paying spouse's income where it didn't before, self-sufficiency, that's again a complicated one. Remarriage of the recipient spouse and child support has newly ended, and the recipient spouse wants to increase spousal support.
And now, how do you go about negotiating changes to spousal support?
Well, just like in any topic with respect to separation and divorce, all of the negotiation options are available to spouses who are wanting to seek to change spousal support. So if former spouses are agreeable to discussing the topic, which oftentimes they aren't, but if they are agreeable, they can use processes like our office offers, such as mediation, collaborative law, or even just plain and simple out of court settlement focused lawyers getting together at a boardroom table, trying to negotiate spousal support changes, or by letters, correspondence back and forth. There's occasions, of course, where spouses are not able, or former spouses are not able to sit down together. And in those instances, of course, a court application may be necessary.
All right, Stephanie, great information as always, and we'll be back next week to continue this subject. There's just so much we can talk about with this, and it sometimes, unfortunately, as you said, is a contentious issue. So thank you for joining me this week, and we will chat with you again next week.
Thanks, Stacy.